Chapter 1060 finally showed us a new glimpse at the lurking legend King Imu and his incredible power in what might be the final ancient weapon Uranus, as well as a really good idea of what could be Luffy's true dream. Welcome to Chapter Secrets, where we break down all the details in every One Piece chapter. Let's begin. The chapter opens up with the Straw Hats shocked by the headlines outlining Cobra's murder and Vivi's disappearance. Among them, Chopper laments the death of Cobra, commenting on his kindness, while he recalls a moment when he thanked them. His moment in particular is from chapter 213, when Cobra thanked the Straw Hats in the royal baths for their service in saving his daughter and country. Similarly, Zoro brings back another moment from the past, which is from chapter 490, when Luffy mentioned he didn't want to bother Ace by going after him. You can even see the attention to detail where Oda drew Captain John's armband onto Luffy's arm, as he still possessed that in that scene before he gave it to Buggy. Meanwhile, the person in the barrel whose name starts with Car is unfortunately not Carrot, but Caribou. Just a few chapters ago, he mentioned that he wanted to comment on his knowledge of the ancient weapons Pluton and Poseidon to a certain someone, an individual that he already mentioned in Fishman Island, being someone that he seemingly hasn't met yet, but he knows would have a great interest in those weapons. However, to actually leave the island, Caribou needed to sneak on a ship since only the worst trio were actually leaving, so he had to sneak in a barrel just like he did during the Straw Hats' initial trip to Fishman Island. Robin continues to read the newspaper, on which he can actually spot a picture of New Marineford with this iconic shape. As Robin comments on Buggy's rise as a new Yonko thanks to Cross Guild, and Luffy mentions how this must be a mistake, you can also spot Nami in the background sadly nodding, as she's one of the few who actually knows about the type of person Buggy is. Meanwhile, Brook is serving Chopper and Usopp some tea, while Zoro and Sanji are still fighting behind them, even several panels after Sanji insulted him. Then Luffy mentions the goal that lies at the end of his dream, as all of the Straw Hats react to his declaration. Among these panels is also the Thousand Sunny, which is a nice way to indicate how it too is a crewmate of Luffy. So you're likely already well familiar with this goal, but allow me to give you a brief history on it. This goal was first alluded in chapter 506, when Rayleigh mentioned how he met Shanks at Sabaody around 12 years ago. Shanks explained to him that Luffy said the exact same words that Roger once said. Though this lacked a lot of context, it was followed up during Ace's death in chapter 574, where Ace mentioned that his only regret in life was not being able to see what lied at the end of Luffy's dream, though this was accidentally omitted in some translations, such as the official English volume release. This was then later brought up in chapter 585, when Luffy declared his end goal was in front of Ace and Sabo, with the camera cutting away to not let us hear what he said, and then brought back during chapter 1000, where it was more properly explained how this is meant to parallel Roger's words, just as Shanks indicated. In fact, we saw Roger declaring that exact same thing in chapter 966, where it paralleled exactly how Luffy told the same thing to Sabo and Ace, something that the anime went even further to make very obvious. Yamato was moved by this, realizing how Luffy claiming these exact same words made him the most likely person to be the new Joy Boy who could one day change the world, something he would likely achieve through this specific dream. So to be clear, Roger's dream was to find the final island in the Grand Line and be the first to properly circumnavigate the world, whereas Luffy's dream is to become the Pirate King. However, after those dreams, there is a goal, their true dream, that they want to achieve, which could only be possible if they manage to get to that point. Roger realized that he was too early and that someone would one day surpass him to achieve it, but now Luffy, just like he says in this chapter, might actually have a shot at it if he becomes the Pirate King. A goal that is very much like Luffy, childlike and silly, enough to make someone laugh. As Luffy mentions, it made Ace and Sabo laugh, and he even says that Shanks laughed until tears sprang to his eyes, just like Roger and his crew did when they finally reached Laugh Tale. So then, what exactly is this goal at the end of his dream? Well, we don't know, of course, but you already likely know that I have my own theory regarding it. I already spoke about this long ago in my first episode of the True History, and ever since then the theory has become quite popular, but my theory is that Luffy's goal at the end of his dream is to throw the biggest party in the world, a party with the whole world. Since I've already talked about it so much, I'll try to sum it up as quickly as I can. can, but I think what's important to realize about the moment when Luffy talks of his dream with Ace and Sabo is not what happens in that scene, but what happens as a result of it. Because of what Luffy said, Ace decides to exchange a bottle of sake between the three of them, laying the first step to Luffy's dream, which could be to exchange sake with the entire world, or rather, the world's biggest party. Inspired by the days that he partied together with the red-haired pirates, prompting him to declare his dream to Shanks, Luffy loves parties above all else. They are the ultimate way to connect people together, where all differences are tossed aside to gather and laugh together. And even Oda himself mentioned how he wants to end the series with a massive party right as they find the One Piece, which only lends more credence that as the finale of the series, this is what really lies at the end of Luffy's dream. The idea of throwing a party to connect the whole world may sound childish, silly, and downright laughable, but it's such a pure-hearted ideal that, just as Nami puts it, he's so much like Luffy. However, we suddenly forcefully shift from such a beautiful, wholesome scene to quite a dramatic one. Sabo manages to get in contact with the revolutionary army in Kababaka Kingdom, though he doesn't use a white Den Mushi to encrypt the call, allowing the wiretapping department from Marine Headquarters to pick up the call. If you don't recall, white Den Mushi are a special type of Den Mushi that block out any interception, allowing for private calls. We first saw them being used in chapter 593 by Dragon to communicate privately without the Marines tracking them down, and on the flip side, black Den Mushi are used to listen in on calls, which we see the Marines using here. As they point out, Sabo is not using a white Den Mushi to block out the call, which the Marines believe is due to the urgency of the situation. By the way, as a small detail, you can see Sabo has a bandage over his nose, which is identical to the bandage he wore as a kid during Luffy's flashback, as well as the one on his cheek. The revolutionaries listen in to what Sabo has to say, but interestingly among them appears to be one that seems to have black wings of sorts. Are they just decoration, some sort of power, or could this actually be a Lunarian among the revolutionaries? Anyway, the Marines comment on how Sabo is currently located in the Lulusia Kingdom. Now, the Lulusia Kingdom has quite the history, as we've seen it here and there in a few spots across the series. For starters, one of its inhabitants, Moda, was present in Ace's cover story, implying that Lulusia was the kingdom that Ace visited during that period. Much later, we finally saw it in chapter 904, where it was assaulted by a subordinate captain of Blackbeard, the pirate Pinkbeard, but the revolutionaries came in just in time to rescue the country. Belle Betty encouraged the people of the country through her fruit, which must have given them the necessary courage in these past few days to stand up to their tyrannical king and overthrow him. Speaking of which, the king was also already previously presented, as King Seki first appeared at the Reverie Conference in chapter 908, talking with Queen Lemon Cheese about the state of the Wano country, calling it not a real country, and was later named in the anime and the Viver cards. As the people of the country commented and his Viver card elaborated on, Seki is a tyrannical ruler who takes the money of his people, bringing poverty to his country, something that is reflected in his Dracula-like design. We can also see in this chapter his daughter Princess Komane, who first appeared in chapter 903 as she was kidnapped from her ship while going to the Reverie, but was later rescued by Kobe and Helmeppo. Speaking of which, by the way, the Lulusia Kingdom sports what looks fairly similar to Russian architecture, so its name Lulusia could be loosely referencing that of real-life Russia. The island's architecture is also a great example of visual storytelling, as we see the division in wealth between the king and the people by how massive the king's castle is compared to the small town below. Going back to Saba's call though, he mentions how he wasn't the one who killed King Cobra, but instead something happened in the empty throne room of Pangaea Castle, where someone sitting on the throne did something. This is basically implying that Imu killed King Cobra in the empty throne room, given the threat that he posed for his interest in the true history, which the government then covered up by blaming Sabo for it. Sabo also mentions how he believed there was no king of the world, which would hint at the fact that Imu is seemingly a man, though since someone like Big Mom spoke of wanting to become Pirate King, it's possible the position's gender doesn't necessarily reflect that of the one who wants to attain it. This position is particularly interesting though, because we get spelled out that Imu is the king of the world, the exact same position that the supposed lurking legend Rocks D always wanted to attain. I've already gone in depth about it in another video if you're curious, but it's very much evident that there's at least some form of connection between Rocks and Imu. However, before Sabo can mention the existence of a king of the world, the Gorosei order the wiretapping to be cut, so the Marines don't get to hear the information, only the revolutionaries who are listening to Sabo, and even in that case his call is cut short so they don't get to hear the full story. However, before Sabo can elaborate any further, we see a mysterious shadow appear in the sky, with the citizens commenting how there seems to be an actual physical thing within the clouds covering the island from light. From this thing, suddenly a bunch of bolts of light descend upon the island, completely eradicating it in an explosion, wiping away the island as it falls beneath the waves. So the clear implication here, by the way the panels are framed, is that Imu commanding a certain something to launch an attack of the island wiped it out. This seemingly served to wipe out the kingdom of Lulusia for defying the government, but the Gorosei commented how it must be fate that Sabo ended up on an island they were planning to destroy, as it allows them to kill the man who found out about Imu's identity before he can reveal it to the world, 2 birds with 1 stone. The question more than anything is how Imu did this, and it undoubtedly has to do with the large thing in the sky. We can actually very briefly see the outline of it in one of the panels, but it appears to have some sort of triangular shape, almost like an UFO of sorts, though it's hard to tell. Really though, for a weapon of this power with the capability of destroying the world to exist, it can likely only really be one thing: an ancient weapon. After all, power like this has been attributed to ancient weapons, with Crocodile commenting how Pluton is capable of wiping away an island in a single blast, just like we see here. But since Pluton is supposedly under Wano and Poseidon is Shirahoshi, then this would only leave it to be the ancient weapon Uranus. Now, of course, it could still be something else entirely. I'm just speculating here, but the idea is worth considering. It would make sense because in Greco-Roman mythology, Uranus is the god of the sky, which would fit with how this weapon flies in the sky and delivers its attack from the heavens. And if the implication that Imu was the one capable of unleashing this weapon is true, then that fits even more because it lines up with the idea that all weapons have a person counterpart who is the one that can unleash them upon the world. Shirahoshi is the only one who can unleash the Sea Kings, Momonosuke is the only one that can open Wano to unleash Pluton, and Imu is seemingly the only person that can unleash this powerful weapon. If you've seen film Red, you might also know that it hints at this specific thing, though I'll leave it for you to discover if you haven't seen the film yet. Imu also seemingly knew about Shirahoshi's role as a weapon, which just lends more credence to this connection. A power like this explains a lot of things, such as for example how God Valley was very literally wiped out from the map, just like we literally see that happening to Lulusia in this chapter. This brings the question as to why the government hasn't used this weapon more for things like horror per se, but given how it needs to mobilitate this massive floating flying thing to attack, it's possible its use may be limited in some form, we don't know. Also, I've mentioned before how in terms of parallels, the 2 most important arcs in One Piece are Skypiea and Dressrosa. Skypiea serves as a microcosm of the world of One Piece, while Dressrosa is a microcosm of the world government and the way it operates. In the case of Skypiea, we saw Luffy fighting against someone acting like the god of the world, which is quite similar to Imu's position. What interests us, however, is Enel's Raigo attack, a giant thundercloud that, similarly to this attack, descended from the sky to wipe out an entire island, though it wasn't with the same speed and power as Imu's attack here. On the other side of the coin, however, we have Dressrosa, and this is where it gets really interesting. There, Doflamingo was made a clear parallel of Imu even wishing to attain his national treasure of Marijoa, and treating Dressrosa in the same way the government treated the world. In this case, Doflamingo's ultimate attack was called 16 Holy Bullets Divine Execution. And what is it that we see in this chapter? A divine execution through 16 bullets descending from the holy skies. The bullets are literally 16 here, try to count them, so the parallel could not be more evident. Just how much did Doflamingo actually know? Either way, it's time we move on. The chapter ends a few days later, where the Thousand Sunny is marching through the cold waters of an area in the New World. The water is so cold that the Sea King completely froze up, being now tossed around by the waves. Nami comments on how the climate likely means there should be a winter island nearby, which might be the location of the next arc. Elbaf didn't seem to have such extreme weather, so this seems a good sign that we could be heading on to a brand new place. The Straw Hats come across a Dansui Uzu, or worm eddy in English, which is a type of whirlpool current. In this case, however, the current isn't at sea level, but instead floating above in the skies due to the extreme climate of the Grand Line. As Nami points out, this means that from somewhere the whirlpool must be pushed into the sky, that somewhere quite possibly being the next island where they are meant to land on. Luffy, however, notices with his haki that there is a person inside the water, with Sanji also noticing that it's a lady. Speaking of which, you can spot the number 32 on Sanji's outfit, which can be read as Sanji in Japanese. Zoro attacks the eddy to free the woman inside using a wave attack called Yakko Odori, which he first used against Saudi Jones in chapter 617 and later more recently against King as well. The kanji reads as Port Bird of Misfortune, but it's a pun on Yakko Odori, a traditional Japanese dance. As Chopper and Luffy are blown away, from within the attic comes out a young kid, being very clearly Jewelry Bonney, whose bounty has over doubled since the Prey timeskip. Since we last saw her in Marijoa trying to rescue Kuma, it's quite a question as to how she got here. It's quite likely that she was involved with the attempted murder of Saint Charles, as she mentioned that she would take revenge for his family harming Kuma, and since it was mentioned that Saint Myoskar helped the perpetrator escape, it's likely this was referring to Bonney escaping from Marijoa. It's also possible that perhaps Kuma used his powers to help her escape, which would explain why she ended up stuck in such a terrible place. Regardless, Bonney already once had a chance encounter with Zoro in Sabaody Archipelago, but it'll be interesting to see her interact with the Straw Hats from here on out. Alongside Rouge, she's pretty much the final supernova who has yet to be relevant to the story, so it's pretty exciting that she might actually headline the upcoming arc. We are finally entering a new arc in One Piece, and I can't wait to see what it has in store.